Well, it's wonderful to get a few minutes with Adya, who is a Quality Systems Analyst at Paccar. Adya, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Viraj.
All right, let's start with a quick introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Adya. Like you said, I'm a Quality Systems Analyst at Paccar. I work for their Kenworth Trucks division, so heavy duty and medium duty trucks. My facility builds custom heavy duty trucks. So that kind of drives the need for a full-time quality analyst, because a lot of our processes are super manual and we want to make sure that we're giving everyone the best resources to build the best trucks. My educational background, I graduated from Purdue. I did industrial engineering, focusing on continuous improvement and Lean Six Sigma. And then I had 3 internships during my time there. And I graduated. I had my first experience with a toxic workplace, and I left my first job within 5 months. I graduated during COVID as well. So both graduation as well as the second job both kind of happened during COVID. And once I successfully was here and comfortable, a lot of people had expressed to me how much they were struggling with finding jobs and how much, how I worked for it, what I did, etc. And it only made me more motivated to share my story with others and help them do the same if they ever needed to switch careers or get to somewhere different in life that they were looking for.
Amazing. And when did you start searching for full-time job opportunities? Again, going back to when you were at Purdue.
Senior year.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the timeline. So my senior year, to start off, I had a return offer from my internship company. So I had that offer in July. So I had my backup in place. The reason that was not my number one choice, and it could have been, I wouldn't have regretted it, but the division that I was going to be working under was about to be sold company-wise. So, and that the tricky part for me was that out of all of the divisions that Textron, which is where I worked, owned, this was the one in automotive parts, and the rest of them were in aerospace and defense and didn't take F1 students. So if that company had sold the division, I would have had to switch companies because I wouldn't have been able to go anywhere else in Textron. So that was my major concern. So I went job hunting, recruiting season, so August to September. I had another offer within 2 months from a better company, much more international, very well known, and they rescinded my offer later. So based on that offer, I accepted. I rejected my internship return offer, and I stuck with this. And about 2-3 months later, during my background check, they found my F1 visa status, which I had not lied about. Mm-hmm. I had mentioned that I was on OPT and I would not need sponsorship in the long term because my parents have applied for our green card. Yeah. But I did need OPT until that green card came. So I had mentioned this during the interview multiple times, but it was not in their notes anywhere. They claimed to not know about it. They're a food and beverage company. They don't need any security clearance or anything, which is why I had shown interest in them. So past 3 rounds of interview and then background check, they found that in our background check, and they do sponsor, but not for entry level. So they came back and they're like, oh, this is falsified. Like you weren't truthful about this, blah, blah, blah. And they used that in order to rescind my offer. So I went from 2 offers to 0 offers by October. And I had lost both opportunities. I went back to my return offer and I tried reneging my rejection. And they were like, no, we've already given the position to somebody else. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, well, okay. So I went back to recruiting, and that was kind of hard because most of my friends already had their offers. So from October to December, I spent hardcore interviewing and flying out places and trying to get anything that I could. And in December, the first day of winter break, I got my offer at Subaru, which was always going to be my backup. Reason being is that it's in the same town as Purdue. So I would not be like changing my lifestyle, it would be very comfortable for me. And I was like, no, I want something more than middle of nowhere, Indiana. So that was my backup offer that I got in December. And I spent the next couple of months up to like middle of February job hunting. And then COVID was in full swing. So then I was like, oh, there's no point anymore. I'm just gonna go. So that's my kind of timeline. So I got the offer in December. My 2 rounds of interviews were in September and then November. I went back to them and I was like, hey, I haven't heard back. And they're like, oh, we forgot. And I was like, oh, lovely. Thanks. Should have reminded them earlier. So yeah, that was kind of my timeline. So everything happened within the first semester of senior year. But there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of nerves.
And then eventually you graduated in the May of the following year, right?
Yeah. So I graduated in May. So I had from February to May, I was work from home,
Got it.
remote. Yeah.
And how did you initially approach your job search?
I changed every year. Like I definitely think that it changed every year. So my first year, after my freshman year, I went to the career fairs and obviously nobody wanted freshmen. So what I did was I leveraged networking big time. So I talked to everybody I knew. And the way I got my internship was I actually put myself on what HR calls like a backup wait list.
Mhm.
And so if people renege their offers in April or May or whatever, they'll actually call people from their backup wait list to fill positions. So what happened, and that's how I got my first internship. I had no success on my own. I had like leveraged a lot of networking and I had put myself on the wait list for a couple of the Fortune 500 companies. And one of them panned out. And it wasn't even in my field. It was an IT business analytics internship in Chevron's cybersecurity department. And so I was like, well, IT business analytics, like, am I like in over my head? And so I asked them, I was like, do you know what the project is assigned? Because they had already planned for this whole internship, right? So they talked about the project. It was all about like ROI and hardware devices and very business analytics more than IT. I was like, okay, like, am I just using Excel? Because it sounded like it was just Excel. And they were like, yeah. I was like, I love Excel. That's fine. So that was my initial approach. I knew that I wasn't going to get anywhere with the regular, especially being an international student was super hard because even the freshmen that got something, they were either going for the 3-term or 5-term co-ops, or they were, obviously they'd rather take a US citizen. So being on that backup list really helped me. So I think I finalized my offer end of April or early May during finals week when somebody had told the company that they were not coming in 3 weeks. And then my second year, I did the complete opposite. Now that I had something on my resume, I was unselective. I was ready to take whatever. So I was just shooting my shot everywhere. Like I was going for startups, I was going for all the way to like bigger companies. I was doing career fairs all the time. Like I went to every school's career fair. But what I didn't learn was that you have to like tailor your resume for different kinds of jobs. So here I had a very generic business analytics resume with a chemical engineering degree. I was a chemie before. And I had not really understood what I was going to do. Like, was it process engineering? Was it continuous improvement? Was it manufacturing or corporate? So one of the things I was given the opportunity to go to manufacturing. And they were like, obviously this is a rougher environment. Are you okay with it? And I was like, yeah, I want to learn what happens on ground zero. Once I got into manufacturing, I realized how much benefit there was having somebody with our educational background. Although most people in manufacturing usually work their way up. Not a lot of people come in from school because it's not a very comfortable environment. It's not that cushiony job you wanted after graduation. So my third year, I was very specific and intentional about just looking for manufacturing internships, but I changed my major. I unspecialized from chemical engineering because I struggled a lot with oil and gas industry, and there was upturns and downturns, and I didn't want the economic situation to dictate my job search. So my third year, I actually switched to industrial engineering. By this time, I'd understood that I wanted to do continuous improvement, which is why I switched to IE. And now I specifically attack the automotive industry. I wanted to go somewhere where I knew that I had a stable environment. People want cars.
Mhm.
And secondly, I was very intentional about the companies I talked to. I only spoke to 20 companies in total. But they were all 20 that I knew other students had worked at and had good experiences, and all international students. So the company Textron, the one that I ended up with, it was a company secret that their automotive division takes international students because 90% of their company was just aerospace and defense.
Mhm.
So that was something that I learned from others' experiences. So by third year, I became very intentional and very specific about what I was looking for. And then when it came to my full time, I was again very specific about applying only to leadership development programs because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do exactly. I wanted to gain a multitude of experiences. I wanted to go into management. And for most companies, their LDP program launches them into management a little bit quicker. So every year kind of had first 2 years, I was super generic and just shooting my shot everywhere. By the next 2 years, I was very intentional. Third year, I was intentional about where I wanted to work. And fourth, final year, like full-time job, I was intentional about the position I wanted because that would be a long-term thing. So I think it's kind of changed a lot. And then for my current job, I was intentional about where I wanted to live. Because being in the toxic environment, I think the Midwest and like having a white male non-diverse company was the reason that I felt very unwelcome. And so I was like, no, I have to go somewhere where, there are people that look like me. There are rules for people that look like me. I don't have to prove myself or anything like that. So coming to a big city and, for example, the West Coast was intentional in that sense. So every year every time I've job hunted, I've had a very different focus for what I was looking for.
Understood. Looking back now, would you have changed the approach you took for searching for full-time opportunities? I know you talked a little bit about the internships as well and how you kind of started generic and then eventually realized where you wanted to be in the manufacturing space, and then you kind of specified your internship search. But when you're looking for full-time position, looking back now, would you have changed anything when it came to just the approach that you took for searching for jobs?
I think for one, I would more than the search, I think before I accepted. So I knew that I wanted a leadership development program, and Subaru had one, and I got in. But I would have rather spoken to people that were there because I think false advertising is very, very real.
Mhm.
Companies can say whatever they want about their program, and you just either trust it and get disappointed later, or you might like it. So I think that is the number one thing that I would have wished that I had done is I wish I had like looked on LinkedIn
Yeah,
and found other people that were currently in the program and reached out before I had accepted the offer.
got it.
Or like well before I was even given the offer. Maybe while I was still interviewing, I had months to reach out and find out more about it. But I think I trusted that every company had good intentions.
Mhm.
And that's not how I felt at the end of it. That's definitely something I would have changed.
Got it. What did you do to get the interviews from the companies that you applied for? Was there anything in particular that you were doing from your end to increase your chances of getting the interviews?
Yeah, I leverage networking, I think, more and more every year. So I definitely took every opportunity I could to find somebody who worked there, to network. Did not apply to Subaru somehow. That was the one place where I didn't know anybody. But I definitely took every opportunity I could, especially when it came to this position. I needed a personal referral. I needed somebody to tell me that this company was okay and I was not going to regret my life. So I think leveraging your networking, asking your network for resources, and understanding what the economy is looking for
Mhm.
is super important. So, especially during a time like now where we're having the great resignation, right? So, everybody's looking for a new job. You have to find out what you're willing to compromise on. So, for me, manufacturing is an essential industry. So, I've been working in person from the beginning of the pandemic. Well, from when I graduated, I was in school at the beginning. But from June of last year, I've been working in person. And that was a compromise that was okay for me because I'm not immunocompromised. I would rather have a job than not. But for a lot of people, I think that was a non-negotiable. They're like, we have to work from home. So I think oftentimes international students, we have to, I want to say, pick up the scraps we almost have to kind of do the jobs that nobody else wants,
Yeah.
because that's how we prove ourselves to being dedicated and to wanting to stay here, etc. So I think it's just an opportunity. Obviously, like, you're not going to become a janitor, but you have to find out where you can fit into the society. So for me, manufacturing was one of the places where I saw that most people with my degree wanted to go into supply chain. There
Mhm.
was a huge demand for supply chain jobs, and people's backup was manufacturing. I was like, what if I use that to my leverage? And I said, hey, I walked up to the recruiter and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for a position in manufacturing. What if I could sell that story rather than everybody else who's like, oh, you gave me an offer in manufacturing? Yeah, I'm not interested, which they're used to hearing.
Yeah.
What if I change the narrative in my favor to take the job that is available that nobody else wants and make sure that they think that that's my number one?
Got it. That's phenomenal. I mean, the advice that you gave is phenomenal. Looking back now, would you have done something different, or would you have changed your approach to get the interviews from the companies you applied for?
Um, Probably not. I think I was pretty sure and satisfied with the way it happened. I think the style in which I interviewed could have been different for different companies. And that's something I learned pretty late. I had like a lot of times what I do now is I look at the motto and the mission and everything, and I'll pull out those buzzwords that mean a lot to the company in order
Mhm.
for them to like put it on their big platform, and I'll kind of link it back into my answers. But I think that's not something I knew at the beginning, so I think the one thing that I didn't know before my first full time was it's not just about the job you do. It's not just about the job description. Company culture is very real, and you can be very dissatisfied if you're not a fit for it. So that's the one thing that I would focus heavier on. Find a company whose ideals match with mine,
Mhm.
and vice versa. Find a company where I am appreciated and loved for the person that I am.
Nice. How did you prepare for your interviews?
So for me now, especially, and earlier as well, I think a lot of it, one, depends on where you're applying. So finding out what the interview process is, Glassdoor is amazing. I always take like about 20 to 25 unique questions besides the tell me about a time that you were on a team. Like very generic questions that like five or six, always have those answers prepared. But I would go through Glassdoor, look for like at least 20 unique questions that other people had been asked for similar positions, and have those answers ready as well. I think, like I said about the company culture, making sure that that's a part of your interview, and obviously that it's a good fit for you. Finding out a little bit more about the personal side of things, and I think that's probably the best advice that I would have. And knowing your resume inside out.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, like, we know what we did, but we may not remember if it was a 10% cost savings or a 20% cost savings, right? Knowing your resume inside out, like knowing absolutely anything that they can ask you, everything that you've put on there, going through everything. I think that's something that I missed a lot, where I would just tell them about the situations they asked me about.
Mhm.
But now I've learned to rephrase my elevator pitch that I've already gone through everything on my resume. And then they can ask me deeper questions about each one of the opportunities that I've had. So I think those are definitely the main points. I think the elevator pitch being a big one. I think a lot of people don't realize that their elevator pitch could be a lot better.
Absolutely. I know you touched a little bit on this, but now if you were to look back, would you have done something different to prepare for your interviews?
No, in fact, it's really weird. I've actually had a really high success rate with my interviews, and I think that's been different. I've been an extrovert my whole life, and I think most engineers are generally introverts. Like it's like a 60-40 divide, right?
Mhm.
So being a minority as a woman, and then also a woman of color, and then on top of that being a an articulated one in that, has been like really hugely in my favor. My interview success rate, I think, is about 70 to 80%, over all the years, depending on what I was looking for. So I think the one thing that I would have changed more, I was always really confident that if I got the interview, I would get the position.
Mhm.
But I think getting the interview was something that I should have focused more on. I shouldn't have needed 400 applications for one interview. changing my resume and tailoring that to make sure that I got the initial interview. Because I was confident about my interview skills, I should have focused more on the initial step, because I think even getting that interview is tough sometimes.
Absolutely. Pivoting towards some company specific questions.
Yeah.
How did you come across your specific role of Quality Systems Analyst at your current company, Paccar?
Yeah. So for me, I actually had a friend who worked in Lafayette, Indiana,
Mhm.
for 3 years. And he was in a long distance with his wife, who lives in Seattle and works at Microsoft. And he had spent 3 years job hunting and being very specific about the company he chose to work for in Seattle. And he ended up at Paccar. And once he did that, he had talked about the opportunities. He had actually interned at Subaru. He's about 3 years older than me. He had interned about 5 years before my full time. So it was well before my time, but he was the only person that I knew that had ever been there. And he's also Indian. So I reached also international. So I reached out and I was like, hey, did you ever feel this way? Like, am I wrong? Is it because I'm a woman? Because you're a guy. And he's like, no. Like, there's a lot of racism that I faced when I was there. And I was like, you could have told me, dude. And he's like, I told you it wasn't the best place. I was like, you told me it wasn't the best. You didn't tell me it was the worst. So I he knew that I was looking for something. And so he's like, I'll keep an eye out at Paccar. And I was like, okay, let me know. And I think I grew up in California for a couple years, and so I knew the West Coast was somewhere I wanted to be. My boyfriend had worked in Portland, so I had been in the Bay Area, he had been in Portland. And then I was like, yeah, I feel like all the West Coast is just a safe bet. And now my friend was in Seattle, and so I was like, yeah, I think all three of those cities would be really good. I had Chicago on the list, obviously. I had Austin, Texas. And so all of these locations were kind of hotspots for me. I'm not a big fan of the East Coast, so I left that alone. So I was looking for opportunities in all these different areas, and he called me one day and he was just like, hey, there's a manufacturing position in quality. And I was like, I'll take it. And he was just like, you don't even know what it is. I was like, I'll take it. I'll apply. And he's like, okay, I'll refer you. I get a referral bonus. And I was like, okay. So we did that. And then I actually interviewed and never heard back for almost 2 months. And I was like, Sahil, I didn't get it. I just feel like so shit. And then he was just like, no, it's okay. Like, things work really slow at this company. Like, don't give up hope yet. And it was true, because I did end up getting hired. Biggest regret though, I would have negotiated my salary more. I don't think I understood cost of living coming from the Midwest.
Mhm.
I think for me, I was like, oh, it's going to be more expensive. I didn't realize how much more.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that I was making a lot more money in Indiana, rather than here.
Mhm.
So that's one of my regrets, but ultimately that's how I ended up getting my particular full-time opportunity.
Got it. So you touched on this a little bit in regards to how you got the interview. It was basically through your friend. Your friend reached out to you saying that, hey, there's this position, and then you applied, and then your friend also gave you the referral.
Yeah.
Once you got the interview, what was the interview process like?
I would say this was the easiest interview process I had. It was a one and done interview. It was with my hiring manager directly. There was a 5-minute phone screen from HR. And the only reason the phone screen existed was she needed to confirm that there was going to be no relocation budget. And I was the only out of state person applying for the position. So she's like, you understand you'll have to move. This is in person. I think a lot of people during COVID were taking that for granted. And I was like, no, I work in manufacturing. I know it's going to be in person. And then on top of that, she was like, and you would have to relocate on your own dime. And I was like, that's fine. It's okay. I'm really desperate to get out of my current job. So I'm okay with that. Let's proceed at least. And so I had a 5-minute phone screen. And then after that, I had one interview with my hiring manager. And it lasted an hour. We had very, normal questions, similar questions. And I I usually am pretty good about asking, and I didn't this time. I always, at the end of the interview during the questions, do you have any questions for me? I usually ask what the interview process for their company looks like. And I usually will be like, hey, like, what's the process? What are we doing? Are you going to take a month? Are you going to take 2 months? Are we going to have 3 more interviews or none? So I didn't ask that question and I regretted it because I didn't hear back forever. And I didn't even have, the weird thing was I had one email from the HR lady and I think she quit during that time, or she resigned, or she went on vacation or something. So I kept getting an auto response from her. And I had not had my hiring manager's email.
Ah,
So I had had the team's link, but I didn't have his email. So I was like, I don't even know how to reach out, even if I wanted to. I couldn't send a thank you note. So I was freaking out. And then I was like, yo, I didn't get it. Whatever. I'm just going to keep applying. And then I heard back about a month later and I was like, what? Oh my God. Like, I really didn't think so. And he's like, no, there was just a lot of like work from our side. Our company's super, super slow. And I was like, you know what? I heard that before because my friend had told me the same thing. So that's kind of how that ended up happening. I definitely like regret, like, it's not a bad question to ask for the email or anything, because I definitely wish that I had had a way to contact him, because he had my phone number and email address and everything. So
mhm.
he called me when I got the offer, but I had no way of getting in touch with him. And I only knew his first name. And at any Fortune 500 company, you're going to have multiple people with the first name. So I had called the facility and I was like, hey, can I please speak to Ken? And they were like, which one? And I was like, the one in quality. And they're like, which one? And I was like, God, I don't know what his exact role is because I didn't have his email or like the signature at the bottom. And so I was like, I wish that I had done that differently. So
Got it. And how long after your last interview did you get the offer? I think you mentioned like a month.
a month.
A month. Okay.
Yeah. And it was just the one interview. And I wasn't sure if that was the only one. I actually thought most companies do at least two. So I thought that I didn't even make it to the second round. I didn't realize that there was only one round. So I thought I was severely underestimating myself because I was expecting a second round request rather than the offer.
Got it. Any last piece of advice for any international student who might be seeking for a full-time job opportunity in the US?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the number one thing is like, well, two pieces of advice I have is make sure you don't decide in your senior year. Like, I've seen this way too much where people suddenly get to their senior year, they've been partying for 3 summers, and then they're like, oh shit, I need a job. It's not waiting for you at the end. It's not at the end of the rainbow. You have to work really hard to get there. And we have to work double hard. Like, that's just like a given. We pay our money, like our fair share of money to get here, but we also have to work double as hard to get the same opportunities that a lot of people who were born in this country could. So that's something I would definitely like, don't underestimate the amount of trouble, and also know what you want. I think that's the number one thing. A lot of people take it very lightly and they're just like, yeah, I'll go to the career fair. And then they don't get anything. They're like, okay, I'll just go home. Like, that's not, if that's your attitude, then you might have to go home at the end of it, right? You're not, you have to work really hard and be very intentional about making sure you have enough experience by the time you graduate. On top of that, I think the one thing I would say is don't believe everything you read.
Mhm.
So all three of the companies that I interned with, on paper, they don't hire international students. And the thing is, the companies you intern with don't have to be the companies you do your full time with, the companies that end up sponsoring you, whatever. So I think understanding that part and being intentional, understanding where people are getting hired. What I did a lot is I would like network and add more than like even talk to. I would stalk my seniors on LinkedIn to see where they had interned. And that's how I found all of these opportunities. Even the wait list at Chevron was something that I learned through one of my seniors. And he's like, people renege all the time and they need a list of people who don't have internships because they're not going to call everyone on their list when 90% of them have found other jobs. So
Mhm.
they have a specific wait list. You just have to find the right person in HR who can get you on that wait list. So those kind of tips and tricks you'll hear from other people. It's not things that are going to be published. A lot of times companies also can't publish about the F1 and sponsorship opportunities and stuff because their whole company doesn't do it and the whole company is not taking a stance, but that department might or that division might. So I think that's those kind of things, like not taking everything at face value. I think people take everything at face value. Even though I had an offer rescinded, I will say that, like, making sure that you're taking every opportunity, not just being like, oh, it says they don't take internationals. Good riddance. No, every company does sponsor. It's just about whether they want to sponsor you. And finding those opportunities where they're either sponsoring for entry level or people that they've sponsored in the past that you know. And then also like looking at H-1B reports. I do that all the time. I'll look at which companies are filing for H-1B reports every year, and you can attack it based on industry, depending on the industry that you're currently in and your major. Because under those H-1B filings, especially if it's the initial filing, it's usually somebody who had studied here, because if you take an internal company transfer, it'll be an L1 visa. If you take people on like, from certain countries, it'll be like a TN visa or an E3 visa, those kind of things. And H1B is almost always somebody who has studied here.
Yes.
So that's something that I would definitely like say, like understanding more about working in reverse rather than looking at the opportunities in front of you and saying, who wants me? You can go the step ahead and be like, okay, who else did companies want, and how can I be that person?
Got it. Adya, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate all the insights that you've shared with us.
Yeah, of course.